Stimulants such as alcohol, tea, coffee and tobacco were strictly verboten to commune members and their guests. But not everyone observed the rules, because they weren't all Germans, you see. Some would sneak out under cover of darkness to a nearby village to enjoy forbidden things like meat, chocolate, beer and local wine.
And this is what I played for him.
She's a pretty bird, she warbles as she flies, but she never hollers cuckoo until the 4th day of July. Our intention here at the Cuckoo Town podcast, with occasional assistance from knowledgeable guests, is to focus on the creative arts, weird fiction, high strangeness, and, frankly, anything else that draws our attention. Join us then, and we'll head down a road less travelled together, to an indefinable place, a liminal space where the weird melds with the creative to form an alchemical smorgasbord of strange. We'll be peering into the unseen world where the magic happens, where the spark that ignites our inspiration abides and the muse resides. Before we proceed, I apologise for the long delay between Cuckoo Town episodes. As usual, my life, like yours I'm sure, has been really busy. When I first began work on this one, I didn't realise quite how hard it was going to be, how much information I would have to research and put together in a listenable form. Anyway, here we are. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to episode 18 of the Cuckoo Town podcast. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Wyatt, and today's episode is Free Love, Art, Revolution and the Third Reich. Or how a bunch of dropout hippies changed our world. Everyone from Mahatma Gandhi and George Orwell to Germany's National Socialists fed on a living stream of thought that had its source at Ascona. That's a quote from The Mountain of Truth, The Counterculture Begins by Professor Martin Green. Amongst the intriguing characters that we are going to discuss in this episode are Otto Gross, Aleister Crowley, D.H. Lawrence, Carl G. Jung, Adolf Hitler, and Leon Trotsky, but so many more equally interesting characters too. If you're interested in art history, occult brotherhoods, geopolitics, great writers, pioneering psychoanalysts, dance innovators, alternative lifestyles, and how the commune at Ascona influenced it all, then please stay with us and enjoy. Going up on a mountain, gonna stand there looking down. At its peak, it was at the epicenter of the counterculture, emitting seismic waves of intellectual thoughts and creativity. It played host to some of the brightest and best of a generation. As the current Monte Verita website says, it was a place where our minds could reach up to the heavens. The groundbreaking ideas that emerged from that commune in the early years of the 20th century, spanning so many disciplines, went on to influence our world, mostly for the better, although some of those ideas did morph in the outside world and were used for more nefarious purposes. It was an earlier guest on the Cuckoo Town podcast, Bob Osborne, an artist, researcher, writer and now a filmmaker too, who first drew my attention to Ascona's Monte Verita commune, and I've wanted to share my fascination with the place ever since. It attracted artists, writers, occultists, psychoanalysts, life reformers, Marxists, anarchists, theologians, communists, socialists, pacifists, bohemians, naturists, alternative health gurus, poets, philosophers, historians, sculptors, geologists, vegetarians, dancers, choreographers, musicians, theosophists, political dissidents, draft dodgers, aristocrats, architects, and even gardeners. They all lived, worked and played together at the Ascona commune. And to talk about the eclectic, innovative ideas that emerged from that small, anarchistic, breakaway collective, and how those talented people from so many different disciplines not only influenced each other, but went on to influence their peers outside of the commune, and then, between them all, they helped change the world. This episode is a kind of beginner's guide to the Monte Verita commune. It's not an in-depth study. My intention here is to just give you a little peek behind Ascona's curtains, a quick glimpse into the fascinating alternative lifestyle that they lived at the commune. I can't possibly cover it all. At best, I'll skim the surface, as there are multiple complex personalities involved and the commune spanned decades. And so, by necessity, I have decided to focus my attention on the golden years of the Ascona commune, which is the 1900 to 1920 period. And I'll try to keep it fairly light, with occasional stupid jokes to keep you awake, especially if you're driving. Anyway, hopefully you'll enjoy what I've put together for you, and it might inspire you to do your own further research on the commune later. I hope so. I'll begin by listing a few of the interesting personalities who were at the Monte Verita commune during that time period, plus a few famous people who probably visited the commune at some point, although I can't say for sure. I'll try to give you a brief background on each of these fascinating characters, some better known than others, but that of course will depend on your own interests. Some of these people are world famous, and millions of words have already been written or spoken about them, so I'll try not to say too much about them. I'll try to focus more on the lesser known personalities, and those that interest me the most. If I don't say much about someone that you rate highly, don't take it as a slight on their achievements. It's more about a lack of time to cover so many fascinating people. So here's a list. Ida Hoffmann, a German founder member of Monte Verita, pioneering feminist, a music teacher, a writer and a socialite. Gustav, or Gusto, Grazer, a German founder member of Monte Verita, an artist and a wandering poet. There's a lot more on him later. Karl Grazer, a German founder member of Monte Verita, brother to Gustav, an ex-army officer in the Austrian-Hungarian army. Peter Kropotkin, a geographer and geologist and an anarchistic communist, which always amuses me as I automatically think of Monty Python's excellent Holy Grail film, specifically the scene where Dennis, the peasant in the mud, played by Michael Palin, is telling King Arthur, played by Graham Chapman, but he's an anarcho-syndicalist, and I live in a anarcho-syndicalist commune. Anyway, getting back to Peter Kropotkin, he came from a very wealthy aristocratic background. Mikhail Bakunin, he was one of the most influential Russian revolutionary anarchists of the time. Erich Mühsam, an influential German anarchist, he saw the Ascona commune as the Republic of the homeless, the exiled and the destitute. Very appealing, not? Otto Gross, a pioneering Austrian psychoanalyst, a disciple of Sigmund Freud. His character often pops up in books by D.H. Lawrence, Hermann Hesse and Franz Kafka. He influenced Carl G. Jung, D.H. Lawrence, Hermann Hesse and Aldous Huxley, amongst other greats of the 20th century. And when I say character, his character often pops up. What I mean by that is a character based on his personality, I should make that clear. Hermann Hesse was a German writer, a poet and painter, influenced by Otto Gross, and in turn Hesse influenced D.H. Lawrence and Carl Jung. Hermann Hesse is best known for his books Siddhartha, Bohemian, Steppenwolf and the Glass Bead Game. Steppenwolf, the band, were named after that book. I'm sure you knew that anyway. Frieda von Richthofen. She was a German baroness, cousin of the infamous German World War I ace pilot, or famous if you're German, I suppose, the Red Baron. And Frieda, I should say, is very, very influential. I'll tell you a bit more about Frieda later. It's a very influential woman. Paul Klee, a Swiss-German artist, writer, and an art teacher at the Bauhaus, and a classically trained former child prodigy, violin player. He was a member of the short-lived Blue Rider Arts magazine group. I think it lasted about 3 years. Friend of Wassily Kandinsky and Pablo Picasso. He was drafted in World War I, but not until 1916, and due to German legislation at the time that protected artists, he fortunately avoided the horrors of trench warfare, although he did lose 2 close friends. His military job behind the lines included painting camouflage onto German fighter biplanes, which might make you wonder if he would have painted camouflage on the Red Baron's biplane? The answer, of course, is no. It's a trick question, as Manfred von Richthofen insisted on having his Albatross aeroplanes painted red, hence Red Baron, due to his vanity. He wanted to be seen, which, you could reasonably surmise, eventually led to his earthly demise. Vladimir Lenin, a Marxist Russian revolutionary and the first leader of the Soviet Russia in 1917. Leon Trotsky, a Marxist Russian revolutionary, a Bolshevik. He was killed by an axe attack in Mexico Mexico City, as referenced in the classic Stranglers track No More Heroes. Well, I had to mention them. I knew the original vocalist, Hugh Cornwell. Not really knew me. He used to sell me Fab lollies, they were called Fab, F-A-B, from Jet Black's ice cream van. I used to watch them rehearsing in our village scout hut.
Leon Trotsky, he got an ice pick that made his ears burn.
Back to the list. Fanny, her real name was Franziska, Fanny zu Reventlow, a German aristocrat, a countess and socialite, a major player in the Schwabing scene, which I'll get to later. Ernst Frick, an anarchist, a painter, and a disciple of Otto Gross, who held such huge influence in this whole story. It's not just going to be a list of names, don't worry. Arnold Ehret, a German naturopath, healer, educator and dietitian, who was a pioneer of raw food and detox. Theodor Roos, an Anglo-German occultist, a Freemason, a journalist, a singer, and the head of the OTO, the Ordo Templii Orientis. Along with his friend and colleague Aleister Crowley, he wrote The OTO, Rituals and Sex Magic. Royce organised an OTO Congress at Ascona in 1917, in which Aleister Crowley's works figured very prominently. More on that later. Carl Gustav Jung, a Swiss psychiatrist, a psychoanalyst, and a writer, influenced by Otto Gross, and Jung came up with ideas with which we are now all familiar, especially those of us who study the paranormal and folklore, such as archetypes and the collective consciousness. Here's a little bit of geography and history about the Ascona region. It's a quaint fishing town. It sits on the west side of Lake Maggiore in the municipality of the historic Ticino canton, named for the river that flows into the lake in the far south of Switzerland. The region is almost totally surrounded by Italy. Today it's an upmarket holiday destination, around half an hour from the Italian border. Interestingly, I note that in ancient times, that region was settled by Celts of the Lepontine tribe. All areas settled by Celts, places such as Cornwall, Wales and Brittany, for example, tend to have a mysterious, mythic feel to them, and Ascona definitely matches that description. The landscape around the town, and especially on the hill itself, has always been associated with ancient magical rituals. Indeed, the OTO, a regular gathering of occultists, began its days on that same hill. Vibrant Mediterranean-style architecture now adorns Ascona's cafes, shops, art galleries, pubs, boutiques and restaurants that skirt the lake, and colourful moored fishing boats, yachts and other leisure boats bob up and down by its attractive lakeside promenade. Ascona is home to the annual jazz festival, Ascona Jazz Festival, and the Museum of Modern Art, and fittingly, the museum shows off work by, amongst other talented artists, Paul Klee, who was a member of the Ascona commune during its earlier halcyon years. The Big Hill is known as Monte Verita. It means Mountain of Truth, and from its lofty heights, which is a shade over 1,000 feet, there are stunning views of the beautiful sapphire blue lake and mountains, lots of mountains. The hill itself appears to stand sentinel looking over the magnificent lake, as if it's still mindful of its distant past. Perhaps it has embedded memories of guarding the small lakeside town against hostile Germanic Lombardy tribes, or maybe the Romans. Now would perhaps be an opportune time to tell you what was on the hill prior to the founders discovering it in 1900, apart from the sheep, goats and triffid-like growth, that is. The Ascona area had always attracted the kind of people who knew there was something beyond this 3D reality that we live in. It drew in the mystics and the spiritual like metal filings to a magnet. In 1889, a magazine published by the International Academy of Spiritism and Magnetism Studies, called Lux, Light, announced the imminent arrival of a new business. It was to be called Fraternitas, the Brotherhood. The purpose of this company was to be the creation of a secular convent on a hill in, and I quote, a free land in healthy air far from the world, to accommodate students of theosophy, to allow them to realise the idea of a life in a human brotherhood. The hill at this stage was still called Mont Monesca, and the two principal authors of the public announcement were Dr. Alfredo Bioda, a Swiss philosopher and politician, and you'll probably recognise his co-author's name, H.P. Blavatsky Helena Petrovna. She's usually referred to as Madame Blavatsky, a famous Russian mystic, and one of the four people who co-founded the Theosophical Society in 1875. Sadly for them, though, the convent project never came to fruition, as Alfredo had been too distracted by his frantic activities as a mediator in the Ticino Liberal Revolution of 1890. There then followed around 10 years where the hill site was just neglected. Lotte Hattimer, Ida Hoffmann, her sister Jenny Hoffmann, Karl Grazer, his brother Gustav, and Henri Odenkoven, 6 nonconformist types, inspired by the life reform movement which advocated a return to nature, founded the commune and within 2 years, 1902, had changed its name to Monte Verita. Here's a little background as to why the Ascona commune came about in the first place. A simple search on Wikipedia will tell you that there had been similar attempts in the recent past at setting up alternative communities, like the Leben Reformers, or Laban Reformers, I never know how to say that one. And we know that the Ascona commune was inspired by local contemporary artist communes too. But I'm thinking more about what drove people to the point that they would basically say, oh, I've had enough of this. There must be more to life than this. I want to get back to nature. So anyway, these are my thoughts on that. Germany was unified in 1871, just 29 years before Ida Hoffmann and Henri Odenkoven set up the commune. Germany experienced a rapid industrialization process, with so many people moving out of the countryside into the growing cities to work in the factories. This created huge stress. You could see it almost as growing pains, both, in individuals and society. Alongside that, with people struggling to adapt to this new way of life, not seeing daylight for hours on end, stuck in dreary, dirty, noisy factories, surrounded by people they didn't know, who were probably in the same position as them. These rural Germans had been used to living in communities where they knew everyone in a village, where they had worked on farms, out into fresh air, sometimes even in the sunshine. But now that life was pretty much gone forever, a thing of the past. They would have dreamed of escaping the bleak industrial landscapes to escape back into nature from where their parents had come. Meanwhile, while this painful industrialization process was ongoing, with many of those at the top of the social tree getting wealthier, often at the expense of the workers of course, there were militarists in the new Germany pushing government for more power, more arms. Certain regions of Germany were being penalized for resisting unwanted changes that had been inflicted on them during the unification process. There was vindictive retribution. Some of these regions were being mandated to supply a disproportionate number of military conscripts, cannon fodder, to the new national army, and local governments of those victimised regions were being starved of essential funding for public services and infrastructure. Now, all this upheaval in German society caused by that rapid industrialisation and its accompanying militarisation created huge problems with people's mental health. Many were struggling to adapt to their new lives. Some of them turned to organised religion for solace, others to alternative spiritual pathways. Many people decided to quit the new Germany. Some of them emigrated to England. My American lady is of Swiss-German heritage. She has distant cousins in England due to those same turbulent changes in Germany. But her own branch of the family emigrated to the US, finally settling in Illinois amongst other German immigrants. Others affected by the rapid changes in German society decided to stay on in Europe. However, their means of escape was to set up alternative communities with like-minded friends. So we're back to Ascona. The idea of a vegetable collective was first suggested by Henri Odenkoven, the son of a wealthy Belgian industrialist. He had exchanged several letters on the proposal with his German lover, Ida Hoffmann, a pianist, well-known multilingual socialite, pioneering feminist, and music teacher to the children of nobility. They had bounced ideas back and forth, and between them they encouraged other forward-thinking friends to join them. Oh my God, that's enough of that. So here's a brief but necessary detour to the Schwabing Bohemian Artist Quarter. That exchange of ideas led to a meeting in the Munich area in the old Schwabing district, an influential, trendy place to hang out in late 1890s and early 1900s. Schwabing fed off the influence of the Cosmic Circle Writers Group. I'll get to them later. And the commune at Ascona fed off the Schwabing scene. So it's like a sort of chain there. Schwabing was a place that attracted intellectuals, artists, writers, and even future revolutionaries. People known to have hung out there during this time period include the Nobel Prize-winning writer Thomas Mann, the Russian painter Wassily Kandinsky, and the Russian revolutionary Vladimir Lenin, who all lived in Schwabing for a while. Vladimir Lenin was writing his most influential political pamphlets whilst he was living in an apartment just off the Leopoldstrasse. Plus, there was another painter I haven't mentioned yet, a man who frequented the coffee shops on Schellingstrasse with a funny little moustache. His name? Adolf. Yes, that Adolf. Professor Martin Green had this to say about Schwabing. In this crucible were fused those ideas of a meaning of life, of the earth, of woman, which inspired Otto Gross to his mission in life, which gave Frieda von Richthofen her glorious identity, which in turn gave D.H. Lawrence the informing ideas of his art. That'll make a bit more sense later. The Schwabing scene was a hotbed of intellectual thought, of new ideas and anti-bourgeoisie politics. Anarchists mixed with Marxists. There were bohemian types, young aristocrats living the high life off daddy's allowance, hard-up working-class students, psychoanalysts, artists, writers. They drank together, did coke and opium, they laughed, they flirted, and happily argued long into the night in the raucous, vibrant bars and cafes. Their talk would have been of how they would change the world, put an end to marriage, experience free love, end all wars, abolish the church, end the patriarchy, amongst other more mundane topics, I'm sure, like should we invade France again, and how's that new soccer team doing, Bayern Munich. These young, ambitious people, some of the intellectual cream of their generation, may well have included the up-and-coming pretender to Sigmund Freud's crown, the Austrian psychoanalyst Otto Gross, the Bohemian novelist Franz Kafka, the German pioneer sociologist Max Weber, could be Weber, I'm never quite sure with German, so I think they pronounce the W as a V, but I don't know, and his brother, Alfred, the German writer Hermann Hesse, the anarchic Swiss painter Ernst Frick, the aristocratic German countess, artist and writer Fanny zu Reventlow, and her friend Elisabeth von Richthofen, Frieda's older sister. Many of the people who frequented the Schwabing scene would later join the Monte Verita commune. There was a steady stream of comings and goings between the two camps, Schwabing and Monte Verita. In 1900, the 6 investors that I mentioned earlier purchased most of the Ascona property from Alfredo Piodo, and also some smaller parcels of land from other hillside owners. The land purchase totaled some 4 hectares in all. By now that land was in a terrible state. Shepherds and goat herds had been grazing their animals at will on the site for about 10 years, and an old vineyard on the hilltop had gone wild. It was suffering from a plant louse infestation. The founding members' appearances may have given the impression of them not being very businesslike to anyone who didn't know them, but they weren't naive. They were intelligent, hard-working people, so they knew instinctively how to run a business. They soon built the Casa Central, a large gathering place, complete with dining areas and a well-stocked library. They built reception huts, several sun terraces, and living quarters for full-time commune members. Large picture windows were constructed to take advantage of the all-encompassing magnificent views. The Casa Central rang to the sound of music. Well, they were in Switzerland, and you know what they say? The hills are alive with the sound of music. Or was that Austria? I think that was Austria. But seriously, Ida Hoffmann liked to play the piano, and I wouldn't be surprised if she had some musical accompaniment, perhaps from Paul Klee on his violin. Maybe Emile Jacques Dalcroze, Isadora Duncan, Rudolf Labon, Mary Wigman, and other commune members and visitors danced to their music. Maybe Theodore Roos sang. Who knows? What did she play? Richard Wagner's drinking song? I doubt it. Maybe something a bit cooler for the new century, Something like Scott Joplin's Maple Leaf Rag. Yeah, I'd go for that.
It is good, yeah? Magnificent.
Henri and Ida needed to raise funds for their fledgling project, so they decided to build a nature healing sanctuary and sun and health sanatoriums, services that they would be able to charge their guests to use. They also soon had a revenue stream coming in from simple, well-ventilated stone and timber, self-facing cabins that they'd built for their guests. The health sanatorium was operated by Arnold Ehret, the German naturopath, healer and dietitian. Arnold promoted a fruit and plant-based diet and was an early pioneer of both the raw food and detox movements. Stimulants such as alcohol, tea, coffee and tobacco were strictly verboten to commune members and their guests. But not everyone observed the rules, because they weren't all Germans, you see. Some would sneak out under cover of darkness to a nearby village to enjoy forbidden things like meat, chocolate, beer and local wine. Eventually the rules were relaxed a little, and meat was put back on the menu, which I feel was a pragmatic decision, as a strict fruit and plant-based diet wouldn't have given commune members or their guests the energy required to work long, hard, 12-hour days in the commune's vegetable gardens or on other building projects. Commune members enjoyed taking cold, invigorating showers in the mornings. They swam naked in the lake, sunbathed in the nude, and took long hikes together out into the beautiful countryside that surrounded the commune. Here's a quote from Anne Hill Fernie. Germany's relationship with nature, she's got a deep voice, hasn't she, has always been both visceral and subliminal. And 2,000 years ago, about 51 BC, Julius Caesar noted of the Germans, the only beings they recognise as gods are things that they can see, and by which they are obviously benefited, such as the sun, the moon, and fire. The other gods, they've never even heard of them. The idea of being naked in nature is, of course, particularly Germanic. There was a back-to-nature type vibe going on, a sense of wanting to live a better, more natural life, to recover that elusive special something that they believed society had lost when the German Industrial Revolution had begun. They were rebelling against materialistic thought. They were harping back to simpler, less complex pagan times.
Hey, baby, are you thrill me so? Hold me tight, don't you let me go. Well, let's dance. Let's dance. Put you the twist, start the best day of the day. I'm that.
They explored different ways of keeping fit. These included group physical training, PT, various pioneering dance methods. They had at least 3 cutting-edge dance specialist choreographers living amongst them. They had Rudolf van Laban, Mary Wigman and Isadora Duncan. Oh, and Emile Jacques Dalcroze, a musician, had devised a new form of exercise called eurythmics. Oh, and here's a little bit of interesting trivia about the Californian Isadora Duncan. She was the inspiration for Aleister Crowley's Lavinia King, a character in his Moonchild novel. Monte Verita commune members, when they weren't partially or fully naked, wore long flowing white garments. The men let their hair grow really long, which was unusual and revolutionary at that time. It was hair as a metaphor for freedom, a symbol of peaceful rebellion and pacifism. After all, if it was good enough for Jesus, it was good enough for them. The inhabitants of a small town of Ascona viewed the commune on the big hill with suspicion. They were strict law-abiding Christians, and their ladies generally just wore black clothing, so seeing the way that the commune members lived their daily lives would have disturbed them, and probably more so in the warmer summer months, when the uninhibited commune members would have wandered around naked. They would have heard the rumours about the commune's open sexual relationships, and of course the big orgies, and drug-taking that they did too. Coke and opium were the drugs of the day, easy to come by in intellectual and artistic circles, especially when some of the commune members had affluent parents, and probably some generous allowances. I should imagine that the town's gossips quite enjoyed having the commune so close by, as they would have had plenty of scandalous material to choose from, and they'd never have gone short of a hot, spicy story. It seems that the townspeople gradually learnt to live alongside their more unconventional, free-thinking neighbours at the commune, and they even came up with a special name for their neighbours, calling them the Lombardy term Balabiot, which loosely translated means naked dancers. So they'd obviously been peeking through Ascona's boundary fences. Speaking of the great holy man, which I did earlier, Gustav, Karl's brother, had a remarkable resemblance to Jesus, so much so that people outside the commune occasionally thought he was Jesus. They would even kneel down by his feet, wash and kiss them. He wore long flowing white robes, sandals on his feet, and his hair was very long. If you look at old pictures of Gustav, you can see he definitely had that wandering Jesus vibe going on. When he wasn't doing impersonations of the wise, peace-loving hippie from Galilee, he was a painter, a sculptor, a devoted pacifist, and a wandering poet too. He helped to raise funds for the Ascona commune by giving lectures and selling his paintings and poetry to the communities around the area. Gustav always created quite a stir amongst the more conservative townspeople of Ascona and further afield on account of his biblical appearance, and when he wasn't having his feet kissed by the locals, he was occasionally harassed by some of them. I'm enchanted, I've fallen under your spell. OK, let's get on to Otto Gross. Otto Gross is a fascinating character. He was one of the major characters, probably the major character in the A Dangerous Method film, which came out in about 2011. Worth a look at. Although he didn't really focus on him quite as much as I thought they would. Otto Gross was one of those people who have an uncanny ability to easily influence others around them to do their will. And he certainly did that. I think there are similarities between Otto Gross and Aleister Crowley. Do what thou wilt. do what thou wilt, right, and all that. Otto Gross encouraged his friends in the Schwabing Artist Quarter and at the Monte Verita commune to sleep around, to indulge in group sex. He even encouraged his clients to act out their sexual fantasies, especially if they were attractive women. He used his weird mesmeric influence alongside his psychoanalytic skills to coax hundreds of women into sleeping with him. He didn't see it as exploiting his position or doing them any harm. He saw it as a form of therapy that would ultimately benefit the world. He believed that our individual sexual hang-ups, etc., were contributing to the madness of the wider world, and that only by letting ourselves go, by letting our animal instincts take precedence over our consciences, could we fix ourselves. Otto Gross was a controversial, groundbreaking individual, a real one-off. Professor Martin Green, in his book The von Richthofen Sisters, said, according to the testimony of several witnesses, Otto Gross exerted a semi-religious hold over his followers, both in Munich, Schwabing and at Ascona, and that authority was exerted in defiance of major moral values. And consider this, taken from Frieda Richthofen's autobiography, Not I, but the Wind. She said, I just met a remarkable disciple of Sigmund Freud, this was Otto Gross of course, and I was full of his undigested theories. Otto did a lot for me, and I was living like a somnambulist in a conventional set life. He awakened the consciousness of my proper self. Frieda went on to explain how Gross had freed her from her conventional ways, encouraged her to sleep around, to throw off her patriarchal ways, and help him build his vision of a matriarchal society. Sadly, Otto Gross would not live long enough to take over from Freud as the top dog in psychiatry and psychology. His drug addictions and mental afflictions snuffed his life out way too soon. He'd be dead at just 42 years old. Nevertheless, in his comparatively short life, Otto Gross influenced many of his contemporaries. These included D.H. Lawrence, Hermann Hesse, Aldous Huxley and Carl G. Jung. So his legacy lives on through their great works. Brings us on to D.H. Lawrence. It could be said that D.H. Lawrence was leading the retreat back to simpler times, the return to nature, away from the noisy, industrialised modern world, just as he'd experienced it in the dirty coalfields of Nottingham. He exemplified that urge, that mood to escape the modern world, that the commune at Ascona was trying to achieve, both in his writing and in his everyday life, in his quest for living more by instinct and impulse than by routine. D.H. Lawrence was, from the moment that he left Nottingham to visit his future wife, Frieda, in Germany, Frieda Richthofen, von Richthofen, forever on the run from the modern world that seemed to disgust him. I had been searching for some mention of D.H. Lawrence visiting the Ascona commune, but I could never really find any real evidence for it. I already knew that Frieda had been to the Ascona commune at least twice prior to meeting D.H. Lawrence, where she had been heavily influenced by Otto Gross, as we mentioned just now, and she had enthusiastically related Otto's ideas and thoughts to D.H. Lawrence. I finally found what I'd like to think is the smoking gun that proves that Lawrence was physically at the Ascona commune. In D.H. Lawrence's book, Twilight in Italy, he mentions that he met, and I quote, some anarchists who were living together in Switzerland. I suppose it could be argued that there were other lesser-known communes in Switzerland too, at Locarno, for example, or that he just happened to meet them somewhere outside of the commune. But I like to think that he and Frieda popped by Monte Verita to say hi to her old friends on their way into Italy, because that's where they were heading through. They were coming down from Metz in Germany, and they were coming down, if you imagine, see the top of where Italy is, they were coming down through the Alps, the border region, into Italy. So they would have passed that area. D.H. Lawrence made good use of all that Frieda passed on to him, and scholars of D.H. Lawrence can see the influence of Gross on him throughout many of his novels. In time, too, these intellectual emanations emerging from the Mountain of Truth would go on to influence his friend, Aldous Huxley. OK, so here's just a short piece on H.G. Wells, who, as many of you will know, I mentioned in passing in my previous episode, because he came from a town where my nan lived. He lived a few doors away. As far as I know, H.G. Wells didn't attend the Monte Verita commune, but I suspect he may have been there, as he was definitely aware of his intellectual peers who were there, and the ideas that were being developed there. H.G. Wells used the Ascona/Monte Verita commune as his utopia, in two of his novels, Modern Utopia in 1905 and In a World Set Free in 1914. Now, I just want to sort of talk about how ideas and ideologies that had associations with Ascona contributed to both National Socialism and communism. So it sort of affected both the extreme left and the right. Most of the German intellectuals that I'm discussing in this episode had some involvement, large or small, in the violence of those turbulent times. I have no wish to get bogged down in all of that. I'm more interested in how their ideas shaped our future. So please try to keep in mind that I'm literally skimming the surface here, and that if you're interested in the deeper political aspect of the times, there are plenty of books available that go into great detail about all that political stuff. The pagan sun and nature worship of the Ascona commune found its way into the Volkisch movement, a rough translation of which is Folkist. Folkist was an ethnic German nationalist movement that would slowly pave the way to the rise of Hitler and National Socialism. The Volk movement was based on initial good ideas like a return to the land and living organically, but sadly it gradually took on a more sinister direction, a belief that race determines your personal traits and abilities, for example. This, of course, would eventually lead to the rounding up of people who they considered to be Untermenschen, subhumans. But there's no need to dwell on all that horrible dark stuff. We all know, or we all should know by now, what they did. But this isn't the place to discuss it, and in my opinion, if we were to have that discussion, then we should also talk about how Marxist ideology also led to millions being murdered. It's interesting when you start digging into some of these Ascona personalities, the people and groups they socialised with, who they influenced, or who they were influenced by. There are several connections between Otto Gross and the Schwabing-based occult-academic writers' society, the Cosmic Circle, Kosmische Runde. The circle members Ludwig Klages, I'm going to call him, Alfred Schuler, Stefan George and Karl Wolf Scheckel. They were interested in mythology, anthropology and cultural history. They championed the superiority of human instinct over science, and their ideas, including that of blood consciousness, influenced the thinking of both Otto Gross and D.H. Lawrence. Ludwig Klages was a philosopher, a graphologist and a close confidant of Otto Gross. The Cosmic Circle's Alfred Schuler was a classicist, a writer, a magician and an occultist. He was accused of anti-Semitism in 1908 by a German industrialist and poet, Robert Boehringer, who believed that Schuler may have been a big influence on the younger, impressionable Adolf Hitler, who, as I mentioned earlier, socialised in the Schwabing district of Munich before the Great War of 1914-18. The Cosmic Circle broke up in 1904 due to an internal dispute. Klages and Schuler had been accused by Stefan George of anti-Semitic comments. Klage continued to take that view even when the Nazis had begun to be far more open about their murderous policies. Alfred Schuler, to his credit, did speak out against the Nazis in the 1930s. Professor Martin Green acknowledges in his The von Richthofen sisters book, which is a very good book by the way, the undeniable link between Schwabing and the Nazi ideology. Did Dalcroze's Eurythmics classes at Ascona influence the Nazis too? When I first saw a photo of commune members at Ascona doing Emile Jacques Dalcroze's Eurythmics movements, I think it was Bob Osborne that showed me that actually, I immediately thought of a similarity to the health and fitness Aryan obsessions of the Nazi ideology of later years, the strength through joy and healthy woman, healthy nation slogans of the Nazis. The Nazis placed great importance on promoting the health and physical strength of the so-called Volksgemeinschaft, German racial community. This obsession for fitness was pushed on men, women and children through massive state-funded propaganda. Now, I don't see anything wrong with encouraging people to keep fit. It has many benefits, of course, not just to the individual but to the community around that individual generally. But pushing the idea of an Aryan super race via propaganda was a bit rich when your country was run by a podgy little ex-corporal with a funny moustache and other less than perfect specimens. When you start to research what was happening in Germany in the 1890s through to the early 1930s when the Nazis came to power, you can see how the influence of the various occult societies had fed into their ideology. As a final note on these depressing links to National Socialism, I've just been reading about Paul Klee, who I briefly mentioned earlier. In the early 1930s, now working as an art teacher in Dusseldorf, Germany, Paul was bullied by the Nazis. They denounced him as a Galician Jew. Basically, that's like a Jew from Galilee. I think that'd be easier to say, a Jew from Galilee. A cultural Bolshevik, a degenerate, and a weak-minded individual. Paul's employers, no doubt under extreme pressure from the Nazi Party, dismissed him without any warning. Paul returned to his roots in Switzerland, but shortly afterwards his health began to deteriorate. There seems to be some debate about the exact cause of his death. At 60 years old in 1940, I wonder if the mental anguish and terror that he experienced at the instigation of the Nazis, and perhaps, too, the incomprehension that his colleagues and employer had stood by and did nothing to help him, was responsible for bringing on his bad health, which then, of course, ultimately led to his death. The Bauhaus Art School itself, founded by Walter Gropius, the German art school of which Klee was a faculty member and teacher, suffered the same fate as Paul. It was shut down by the Philistine Nazis in 1933, who believed it to champion degenerate art and artists. Ascona had already played host to several secretive occult brotherhoods, even before the hill was renamed to the Mountain of Truth in 1902. These fraternities included the Munich-based Cosmic Circle that we just discussed, and the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. However, in 1917, the Anglo-German Freemason and occultist Theodor Roos held an OTO Congress at Ascona's Mountain of Truth, in which he promoted Aleister Crowley's Thelemic religion. He also arranged readings of Crowley's poetry and recitations of his Gnostic masses. Crowley was said to be living in New York at that time. Crowley was a well-travelled man, and he used his celebrity, his magical activities, as cover for espionage work on behalf of various employers. It got him into countries that other operatives would have found very difficult or impossible to enter, such as Russia. Checking out Ascona, either for his own interests or on behalf of a third-party government or intelligence agency, would, I feel, have been too much for him to resist. You see, Aleister Crowley ran a coven in the far west of Cornwall during the 1930s, where he helped to organise black magic rituals and sex and drugs orgies with top-ranking RAF officers, Royal Air Force, high-ranking politicians, socialites, celebrities and other influential people present. There is anecdotal evidence that some of these clandestine sex orgies and black magic rituals at ancient sites were recorded on cinefilm, and very likely for nefarious purposes, as in blackmail. It's nothing new, and it's tempting to believe that the sex orgies organised by Otto Gross at Ascona many years earlier were also filmed on behalf of some clandestine agency for some immoral purposes. Consider this. There were rumours that Otto Gross rented a huge empty barn in which to host his sex and drug-taking orgies. When I first heard about this, I immediately thought about the Aleister Crowley coven, the orgies and black magic rituals stuff, and the more recent Jeffrey Epstein saga. It's my contention that Monte Verita, even though it was initially set up by virtuous people for noble purposes, may well have been corrupted by unscrupulous people in similar ways. The Ascona commune was a melting pot for anarchists, Marxists and various other exiled revolutionaries, for example, Vladimir Lenin and Leon Trotsky, hence the interest that various European/American intelligence agencies may have taken in the Ascona commune. Trotsky had been jailed in Siberia after the failed Russian Revolution of 1905, but he had escaped. Then he spent several years in exile. Now we know that he was in the Schwabing district of Munich and at the Ascona commune, sometime between 1906 and 1915. During those missing years, before the more successful Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, Trotsky had also been in Britain and the USA. London and Washington, perhaps, if you get my drift. Was he receiving instructions, help, and being funded to overthrow the Tsar? Were certain intelligence services keeping a watchful eye on everyone who was coming and going at Ascona? Were they paying someone at Ascona to do that for them, to engage these transient wannabe revolutionaries in conversation about their plans for the future? Bear in mind that Monte Verita and earlier communes that were on that site had always been magnets for anarchists and budding revolutionaries from countries all over Europe. The free-thinking, free-loving intellectuals and artists of Ascona's Mountain of Truth experimented with new ways of living and loving together, alternative diets too. They produced new ways to help not only our individual mental health, but that of society as a whole. Their strong, charismatic women and men advanced the feminist cause, and they gave us more independent educational options. Their cutting-edge dancing and other inventive modes of movement still keep us fit. They produced great art, literature and poetry, and much more besides. That gathering gathering of great intellects and talents. That small, scruffy bunch of hippies, the first hippies, at the time, probably thought they were just having lots of fun in the sun. But their combined minds have left a tremendous legacy, and their influence continues to this day. None of us are untouched by the conversations, the ideas, and the activities that took place at the Ascona Commune between 1900 and 1920. These creative people inspired each other, and they inspired others too. They worked, slept, and played together. But most of all, they helped to shape our modern world. Think of their ideas as seeds planted and nurtured at the commune. Ideas that would eventually bear fruit, the good and, as I've shown, the not so good, in the wider world beyond Ascona. Think too of the archetype, a creation of an Ascona commune member, the great Carl Gustav Jung, the archetype of a man going up a mountain to obtain some fundamental truths. Well, they all went up the mountain. I hope you enjoyed that, but as I said earlier, this has only been a quick overview of the Ascona commune, its connections and its influence on the outside world. I'd have loved to go into more depth on some of these charismatic individuals. Most of them, if not all of them, deserve an episode of their own, especially Otto Gross, D.H. Lawrence, Frieda van Richthofen. But I've only got a limited amount of time available. I'm hoping to get Bob Osborne back on Cuckoo Town soon. He's an authority on many of the fascinating people that we've discussed today, so maybe he can fill in the gaps in my knowledge, discuss my ideas on the possible espionage and put me right on any errors I may have made. Speaking of Bob Osborne, he's releasing his latest book very soon, and an accompanying documentary too. They will both have some interesting Ascona content within them. The book and film are both titled Zena, Spirit of Place. They will both be available from various sources and from Bob direct too. You can find him and details of his books and films on social media at Rebel Not Taken. That's all one word, Rebel Not Taken, and or Bob Osborne, Zena. You've been listening to the Cuckoo Town podcast, and I've been your host, Mark Anthony Wyatt. It's a Leviathan Media production, copyright Mark Anthony Wyatt 2023. We hope you enjoyed the show, and if you did, please spread the word by telling all your friends about us, and please like, subscribe and share the show on social media too. We're on all the major podcast platforms, and we're on YouTube too. We'll see you next time then, when we take another stroll together down a road less travelled. Oh, and just one more thing.
Be lucky.
She's a pretty bird, she warbles as she flies, but she never hollers cuckoo until the 4th day of July. Jack of diamonds, you're the meanest heart I know. When you're up my poor pockets, my silver and gold, I'm going up on a mountain, gonna build me a whiskey still, and I'll sell you one bottle for a $20 bill. Going up on a mountain, gonna stand there looking down, so I can see my pretty baby whenever she comes around. Oh, the cuckoo, she's a pretty bird, she warbles as she flies, and she never hollers cuckoo until the 4th day of July. Oh, the cuckoo, she's a pretty bird, she warbles as she flies, but she never hollers cuckoo until the 4th day of July.
It is good, ja? Magnificent. Shake them lederhosen.
You know what those are?
Rifles? Who on earth are these for, Jimmy?
Army equipped to fight for Britain when the balloon goes up.
What army? What balloon? Up what? Fight against whom? Come on, Jimmy. Who are you going to fight against when this balloon of yours goes up?
Forces of anarchy, wreckers of law and order. Communists, Maoists, Trotskyists, Neo-Trotskyists, Crypto-Trotskyists, union leaders, communist union leaders.
You see?
Atheists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans, football supporters, namby-pamby probation officers, rapists, papist rapists, foreign surgeons, head shrinkers who ought to be locked up, Wedgwood Ben, keg bitter, punk rock, glue sniffers, play for today, squatters, Clive Jenkins, Roy Jenkins, up everybody's, Chinese restaurants. Why do you think Windsor Castle is ringed with Chinese restaurants?
Oh, is that all?
Yes.
I see. You realise the sort of people you're going to attract, don't you, Jimmy? Thugs, bully boys, psychopaths, sack policemen, security guards, sack security guards, racialists, packy bashers, queer bashers, chin bashers, taxi bashers, anybody bashers, rear admirals, queer admirals, vice admirals, fascists, neo-fascists, crypto-fascists, loyalists, neo-loyalists, crypto-loyalists.
You really think so? I thought support might be difficult.